Have you ever been in a completely silent room trying to get something done and you just can't focus? You find yourself needing to put on some music or a podcast just to be able to think straight. Well, if that sounds like you are definitely not alone. And the reason why has nothing to do with being distracted. So let's get into the fascinating psychology of why some of us actually need noise to concentrate. So why is it? Why does total silence feel so, loud to some of us? You might feel like it's a flaw, but here's the thing. Psychology tells us that needing background noise to think is actually a sign of a very active mind. It's not a weakness, it's a cognitive management tool.
The common myth is that you're just easily distracted, but the reality is so much more interesting. Your mind is actually skillfully managing a state of cognitive overload. So the key here isn't a lack of focus, it's that you have an abundance of internal activity going on.
So our first stop is figuring out what's really happening inside that busy brain of yours. Because for people with really fast-moving minds, a silent room is anything but silent on the inside. It all comes down to this idea of mental noise. And this isn't just you daydreaming. We're talking about your brain running constant simulations, replaying that awkward conversation from yesterday, and processing all kinds of emotional data. This internal chatter can get so loud that it literally interferes with the task you have right in front of you. So here's how this buffer effect really works. In a quiet room, that mental noise we just talked about takes center stage and just hijacks your focus. But when you bring in some external background noise, music, a fan, a coffee shop, it acts as a buffer. That sound is just enough to occupy that chattering part of your brain, which then drowns out all those internal distractions. And that right there is what allows your analytical mind to finally lock in and get to work. Okay, next up, let's dive into something that's rooted deep in our survival instincts. It's this idea of the safety of sound. And it explains why for some people, a calm, quiet environment can actually feel, threatening. This often comes from a state called hyper-vigilance. If you grew up in an environment that was maybe a bit unpredictable, your brain could have learned to stay on high alert as a survival skill. It's a protective mechanism that just never really learned how to switch off. And this creates a really fascinating difference in how we perceive things. For a hypervigilant brain, silence isn't peaceful at all. Think about it. In nature, a sudden silence could mean a predator is nearby. So for some, silence can actually trigger a stress response. But background noise? That provides what we can call ambient safety. It's a predictable, constant input that tells your nervous system, hey, everything's okay, you can stand down. And this is really the core of it. It's not just a vague feeling of discomfort. It can be a genuine physical stress response. So the noise you put on isn't a distraction. It's the very thing that's creating an environment where your mind finally feels safe enough to think clearly. All right, let's move on to our third point. The sheer exhaustion that comes from just thinking. Sustained mental effort is incredibly draining, and background noise can be a surprisingly effective tool for managing that weight. Thinking is hard work, right? Planning things, imagining different futures, evaluating choices, all of this stuff consumes a massive amount of our cognitive energy. When you're in that state of cognitive overload, silence can feel so heavy because it forces you to face the full, crushing weight of your own thoughts. This is exactly where background noise becomes this incredible tool for emotional regulation. It helps create a sort of boundary, a line between your intense inner world and the actual physical task you need to get done. And that separation is what prevents you from getting lost in all those layers of abstract thinking that can lead to anxiety and paralysis. And finally, let's talk about this super interesting link between noise and motivation, especially when it comes to those tasks that we just can't seem to make ourselves start. You know that feeling? Well, that resistance is often due to something called selective motivation. A lot of people with high internal standards really struggle with tasks that feel inefficient or, let's be honest, just boring. If there's no immediate little dopamine hit or sense of reward, the brain just kind of resists starting. So, how does noise solve this problem? Well, when you're facing one of those boring tasks, your brain is struggling to get going. But if you add some background noise, it provides a gentle, low-level stimulant, and that gives your brain just enough engagement to keep it from wandering off, which effectively bridges that motivational gap so you can finally get started. So if we bring this all together, your brain might be buffering internal noise or seeking ambient safety or managing cognitive overload, or maybe just trying to bridge a motivation gap. The big takeaway here is not that something is wrong with you. And this is probably the most important thing to remember from all of this. You are not broken or difficult. You are simply wired differently. Understanding these patterns inside yourself is the first step to stop fighting your own nature and start working with your brain, not against it.
So I'll just leave you with this question. Now that you have a better understanding of your own mental blueprint, how are you going to lean into it? How are you going to design your environment to choose your own peace and turn all that high mental activity into your greatest strength?